I hope everybody is well. Still waiting for the warm weather here in Western New York, but at least it's been sunny. So we're going to continue with what we were talking about last week, which is who are the people in Revelation chapter 1, where it says that he was speaking to, or he's writing to those who were servants. And so we were looking at, we looked a little bit at the word servant, and we started to look at what the servants might be like. And tonight we're going to pick right up from there. I'm going to read the last couple verses from last week, and then we'll slide right into this week. So before we start, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for all that you've done for us. I thank you for the gift of your Son. We thank you for the cross and the plans and the grace, kindness and mercy that you have in store for us. We definitely look forward to it. Lord, I pray you strengthen our hearts and minds as we walk in the world. I know that we think, especially today, because we look at things around us and think things are bad. But I know, and I think about it ever since the end of the Garden of Eden, things have not always been great. And some people that worship you are able to push through and get through with your help and your strength. So, Lord, I pray that you would help us out with that and keep us strong in mind. And Lord, I pray for Kenny in his illness. I pray that you would give him strength and peace as he deals with this, and listen to his doctors and do the things he needs to do. Pray you give him some type of peace and guidance through this. And all these things we ask in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so last week I finished off, I won't say abruptly, but I kind of ended it because I knew I wasn't going to be able to finish. And so the passage we ended last week was Romans 12, 1 and 2. And we were talking about we were beginning to talk about what it means to be a slave. And tonight, I just want to quite simply go through some passages that I think show what was expected of these folks, because it matters if we try to compare us today to them at their time and what they were expecting. So who exactly this letter was pointed to is really important. And so as we continue looking at what a slave is, I'm going to include things by Paul, because Paul he had the same mindset as the 12 disciples. They might have gone about things a little differently. Paul might have been, or actually he was, probably a more zealous evangelizer, if we want to use that word, because he was spreading the evangel, the gospel. But I think that was God's design, was that he chose Paul because he knew that Paul would go out and do the things he needed to do or needed Paul to do. And I think sometimes for me, we're going to read some from 1 John also. And I always think 1 John is so forward and so direct. And Paul might not be as forward and direct, or in the words. I mean, he might be being forward and direct, but the way he says it is different. But I think Paul has the same type of urgency because he knows something is coming. So in Romans 12, 1 and 2, it says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So Paul is urging the people here in Rome to know what the will of God is. He's urging them also to give themselves as living sacrifices. And if we take that in a literal sense, a living sacrifice, if we take a sacrifice that is being killed, it was done. Its life was over. Its life was, in essence, being given for others. And this is what Paul is urging these folks to do, to be a sacrifice, except you're a living sacrifice. So you go about your life as a sacrifice to God and to others, as we're going to see. So he says it's holy and acceptable. Nothing else is acceptable to God but that. He says again, do not be conformed to the world, because in the world are the things that are going to pull you away and cause you to lose what you're striving for as a living sacrifice. And discerning what the will of God is. And a lot of people make a lot of what is the will of God. What's the will of God for my life? And some people, I think, spend way too much time and effort thinking that God is somehow going to show them what his will is for them in everyday life. And I don't believe, personally, I do not believe at all that that's what Paul is saying. And I certainly do not believe that that is what God's aim is also either. His aim is not, when you wake up in the morning and pray, to speak to you and tell you to go to, a certain location to see a certain person or any of those things. If you do those things and the person needs help and you're going and you're being a living sacrifice towards that person, then certainly that's the will of God. But you could know 5 people who have needs, and maybe that day you can only visit 3, and the next day you visit 2. That's just how life is. But you're doing things that would be the will of God. And I think if we continue in this chapter, we're going to see what is the will of God, because Paul does not leave them hanging. Paul was met by Jesus Christ and was told what to do. Paul was special, like the disciples were special. Paul possibly even more special in that sense, anyways. He was told something. Most of the people that traveled with Paul were just traveling with Paul. They weren't told by God, go travel with Paul, any more than people after Paul died and everybody died and someone lived in 300 AD and God told them, write something down and do this or do that. That's not the case. If you look through the Old Testament, it certainly wasn't the case for most people. There were select people in the history of the scriptures that God spoke directly to and asked them to do something in particular. We could say Israel. He told Israel what they were going to be and what they should do and how things were going to go if they did it. And of course, they didn't do it. But there were very select individuals that God had that type of interaction with. And there's a great reason for that, because that fit into his plans for what he was working. So if we continue down the chapter, we go to verse 9 and we're going to read through verse 21. And I believe that in these verses, we are going to find out what the will of God is for us. And it's for us every day as we walk in the world, no matter who we're around, no matter who we're talking to, no matter what we're doing, even if you're by yourself and because you have thoughts, it's all, this is his will. He says, let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Some people would say that none of this should be taken literally, that we do the best we can. Things happen, and sometimes we have to overcome evil with evil. Sometimes we're not going to feed our enemies. We're going to hurt them, harm them, kill them. And, you know, it might come as no surprise to anybody if you've been listening to me for the past several months, but I believe that Paul meant this literally. And it was to be taken as far as is humanly possible. You know, he does say in verse 18, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. There might be situations where you can't live peaceably with somebody, but you're still not supposed to use evil over them. You're trying to overcome evil with good. And why is it that Paul would say these things? And why is it that I believe that he means them in a very literal sense? And I believe it's because it's exactly what Jesus did. It's how Jesus lived on this earth, and it's what Jesus displayed in his life and in his death. And we are called, Paul says a couple times, to imitate either him as he's imitating Jesus. And I think the other verse, I can't think of where it is, but he says, imitate God. You imitate God by imitating Jesus, because Jesus was the perfect manifestation of God on the earth. God was. He was in Jesus. I was going to say, if God was a man walking on this earth, that's what it would look like. But that is exactly what it looked like. You imagine a God today walking on the earth. You know, in any situation that you see and anything you hear in the news. You know, I know it might be cliche to say, and I see people with shirts or bumper stickers, what would Jesus do? And I used to get a chuckle out of that and think, but it's true. That's how you have to think. That's what Paul was telling these folks. This is God's will. These are the things that you do or don't do. And if you do these things, then you'll be doing God's will. You know, I know we read Philippians 2 a lot, but I'm gonna read it again right now, verses 1 to 11 in chapter 2. Paul says, if there is any encouragement in Christ, any consolation from love, any sharing in the Spirit, any compassion and sympathy, make my joy complete. Be of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interest of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God also highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bend in heaven and under earth, and on earth and under earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That is, I think, in a nutshell, what Paul and Jesus and the disciples, especially those that wrote books that we have to read, that sums it up. The two greatest commandments: love God, love others, and that's God's will. There's no, I don't think there's, I'm sure there's no secret to knowing God's will. There's no time you have to spend, on your knees for 3 hours in the morning trying to figure out what God's will is. It's right there. Paul lays it out for us. Jesus lays it out for us. God laid it out for us in the Old Testament. We find that those things said numerous times. It's right there. It's how these people walked and carried themselves in this time frame that they were in. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that we don't do the same. But I think there's a little difference between us and them. It doesn't mean that we don't have the same standard. What I'm trying to get across is that it was written to some people, and these people who were servants were living a particular way. And I think it's certainly possible that if they didn't live this way, and they didn't seek after the will of God, and they didn't follow this, and they didn't seek after or live as they were in his kingdom, I think it's possible that they might not have been part of everything that was happening at the return of Jesus. I'm not saying they weren't saved, but I'm saying that there was a standing and a purpose in what John and Paul and others are trying to get across to these people. And that's why John wrote to those 7 churches. And he, obviously it's words that he was given, or he wrote as things were given to him in the best way he knew to get across to these guys. These folks, they had to get back to where they were, because if they didn't, then they were missing out on something truly miraculous and amazing. So we're going to turn to 1 John and read from chapter 1, verses 5 to 7. And then we're going to read a little bit from chapter 2 also. So we just read some from Paul, and it sounded very urgent. You need to do this. And we're going to read from John. John is... First John is much more pointed, I think, a lot less words to get across the same exact thing that Paul just said. In verse 5, it says, "This is the message we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him while we are walking in darkness, we lie and do not know what is true. But if we walk in the light as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin." Now, the blood of Jesus Christ cleansed them from all sin. But I think what John is trying to get here is that you can't say that you're part of what God is doing, or that you're a believer. Think of Paul in 1 Corinthians. Think of the young man He might not have been a young man, a man of some age, that was basically booted out from the church there, and hopefully he found his way, because he and the Corinthians claimed that they were one thing, but they were living in a different way. And even Paul said that there's a group of people that would not inherit the kingdom of God. It doesn't mean they're not saved. It doesn't mean they lose their salvation. But it means that there's something that's to be inherited that they're not going to inherit. And this is what John is saying right here. He's telling them, if you claim who you are, you better live like who you are. Because if you're walking in darkness, because in God there is no darkness, then you're lying to yourself, and you're lying to the rest of us, and probably worse, you're lying to people who are, on the fence, or people that they're trying to draw in. So I think he's speaking with urgency. John has a vision. He had a vision, but John knows that the Messiah is coming, and you got to be on the right side of things. There's not a gray area when you read John. No gray area. No area like we just read in from Paul, verse 12:18, that says, as best as you can, live peaceably with everyone. For John, it's, you better live peaceably with everyone. In chapter 2, verses 4-6, it says, whoever says, I have come to know him, but does not obey his commandments, is a liar. And in such a person, the truth does not exist. But whoever obeys his word, truly in this person, the love of God has reached perfection. By this, we may be sure that we are in him. Whoever says, I abide in him, ought to walk just as he walked. Of course, talking about God and Jesus. And I think the key here is in verse 5, the love of God has reached perfection. That's what he's referring to by the commandments here. I do not believe he's referring to the commandments of the Old Testament. I think he's referring to the commandments of love. Paul expounded on them in chapter 12, and he does so in other places also. And this is what John is driving at. And so the love of God being perfected in someone is evident because they're living in love, exactly as love is meant to be lived. So he says that we ought to walk just as he walked, just as Jesus walked. And this doesn't just because it's John, we can't limit it to the Gospels and say, oh, it's only when Jesus was alive and the things he did. No, you got to also think of Philippians chapter 2 here. You are dying to yourself so you can be alive to others. And that is what makes you alive. That's what love is. So again, for John, I think it's an absolute must. We'll scoot down to verses 15-17. He says, do not love the world or the things in the world. The love of the Father is not in those who love the world. For all that is in the world, the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, the pride and riches, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And the world and its desire are passing away, but those who do the will of God live forever. So here he's, again, just like with Paul, stay away from the world. All the things of the world are just going to drag you down, and they're going to drag you down to the point that you are going to be missing out on something. They were to desire nothing of the world, nothing. We can't limit it to fancy clothes in their time. I won't say big TVs. In their time, it was fancy clothing, fancy jewelry, the best looking sandals that you can buy, fancy head garb that they might have worn in those days in the Middle East, houses, cattle, sheep. I mean, those things were all riches. to them at that time. And those things were not to be desired, because all those things are part of the world. So it goes well beyond possessions and physical luxuries. It also has to do with the heart and the character of the individual, and pride. And again, dying to self. These things are all very important. They're important for us. But I think in this time that they were living, well, I'll say it was ramped up because there was something coming, and these men, John, Peter, and Paul, and Matthew, all of them, and wherever they might have gone and ministered, their hope was that, everybody would get what was going on, because I think at some point, even we talked a while ago about, well, Jesus died, and even after he died and ascended, they still didn't get everything, and they needed the Spirit to come and help them. Hopefully, just from what I'm reading from these guys, they got it. They got it after a point, and they were really trying to get other people to get it. We did something from Peter a while back. So we're going to go to First Peter, and we're going to read chapter 1, verses 14 to 16. It says, like obedient children, do not be conformed to the desires that you formerly had in ignorance. That would be the desires of the world. That was added by me, in case you don't have a Bible in front of you. Instead, as he who called you is holy, be holy yourselves in all your conduct. For it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. Amen. And why is it that they need to be obedient and conform to Christ and not to the desires of the world? Because in verse 13, which I don't have in front of me, but in verse 13, he says, Jesus is coming. He's coming back. And so then he follows that with, be obedient, don't be conformed to the world and your desires that you used to have, and be holy in all of your conduct. Holy, separated. Separate yourself from everything that's going on around you. Separate yourself from the old religious ways. If we want to say that this book is written to the people in dispersion, separate yourself from all that, because it's old, it's passing away. There's the new way, and we've been telling you the new way. Jesus was telling you the new way. Follow it. So very important. And it was hard, very hard for these folks, I'm sure. I'm going to read Matthew 19:23 to 30, because Jesus here tells how hard it's going to be. It says, then Jesus said to the disciples, truly, I tell you, it will be hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. Of course, he just got finished talking to a rich person who was disappointed that they couldn't take their riches, that they had to leave everything behind. In verse 24, it says, again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. When his disciples heard this, they were greatly astounded and said, then who can be saved? But Jesus looked at them and said, for mortals it is impossible, but for God all things are possible. Then Peter said in reply, look, we have left everything and followed you. What then will we have? And Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man is seated on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or child or fields for my name's sake will receive 100-fold and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. So a time is coming, Jesus is saying, a time of renewal. And when that time comes, those who have left everything behind, those who have left the world behind and followed me, those will receive 100-fold. The 12, if they do the same, will receive what looks like to be pretty nice positions. But the point Jesus is making is that it's going to be difficult. It just got more and more difficult, even after Jesus died. And we know that Rome started to really squeeze in there. There was just a lot going on. The Jews, I don't know how many were involved in it, but they had an uprising. I mean, there was all kinds of things. Jesus talks about father and mother against each other and children turning in parents. I mean, that's the kind of thing that was going on. I liken it to, you think of France in World War II. They just, the Germans just rolled right in. And then, Lisa and I have seen some pretty neat spy movies of the people in the underground in France, and they just turned each other in like it was nothing. And it's the same. I think the same things were happening here, not only turning people into Rome, but turning people probably into the Jewish leadership, because we know also that they were putting the squeeze on believers. So being a slave was not easy. It was very hard. These people suffered. Some of them suffered with their lives. And the people that John is directly aiming this letter to, or book to, I believe, are the people that Jesus just talked about, the people that are living sacrifices, as Paul said, and the people that have died to themselves and lived for others. And what Jesus is saying here, he's not saying forsake your family and forsake everybody, but live in love, and follow me. And if there's people around you that are hindering you from that, of course, if it's family or whatever, you got to make the decision of what it is that you want. Some people read that and they think, oh, how awful. Well, people make those decisions every day today, depending on what's going on in their family and friends. It's not, it's a hard decision for sure. And God was looking for those that were literally going to hold up and follow the program that was coming. So in 2 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 11:30, it says, if I must boast, this is Paul speaking, of course, I will boast the things that show my weakness. And the reason I had that single verse out is because of what Jesus just said. The first are going to be the last are going to be first. The whole idea that the cross is foolishness to the world. It was foolishness to the world at that time because no God or deity hung themselves on a cross. They all had immense power. And if it meant quashing human beings in the process, that's what human beings believe they did. And that's kind of what I believe Paul and Jesus are both getting at. The weakness, because that's how, if you're a person who lives in love, the way God displayed love, people will view you as weak because you don't have vengeance, because you try to defeat evil with good, because you do all those things, people think you're weak, because people think you need to carry a big stick and bash everybody over the head who wrongs you. Of course, Paul said, as peaceable as possible. There's going to be times and situations you find yourself in where it's going to be hard, and the peace at that very moment might not be exactly possible. But Paul is saying, use your renewed mind in that situation and do as best as possible in showing love to the other person. So the cross is weak and foolish, and God died for, his son died for the enemy. The death of Jesus was non-retaliatory, non-violent, by any aspect of the divine nature of God. It was a violent death that he suffered, but that was at the hands of men. Um, there was no, what I mean to say that non-retaliatory, non-violent, there was no violent action of God against men for what they did. There was no retaliation for what they did. There was no retaliation on Jesus' part. I mean, think of the temptation. That's what it was all about. Here it is. You can have it all. You're the Son of God. In fact, I'll give it to you. And Jesus said no, 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 because that's not what it's about. And so when Paul says, let this mind be in us, in you and me, that's what he's saying. He wants that to be in us. And for these folks that they're talking to, he really wants them to understand this. So in 2 Corinthians 4:8-11, Paul says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. And he's, of course, talking about the things that he and those that were with him went through. In verse 10, he says, always carrying the body, the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So the whole idea Paul is talking about here is all the suffering he went through, all the suffering that he says others shared with him, such as the Thessalonians, all of those folks, he's saying that their suffering means something. It's going to mean something. Always carrying the body of the death of Jesus. That means always carrying the cross. The cross is always before them. Everything they see is, as Greg Boyd calls, crucivision. That's how Paul looked at everything, and that's how the people that are with him looked at everything. And by doing that, they were showing life. They had life. And they were showing the life to other people of what Jesus is about. So the life of Jesus, the death of Jesus, is the key. It's, you can say it ties it right back in with Philippians chapter 2. That's what Paul would strive to imitate in his own life, and that's what he wanted others to strive in their own lives. And so I'm going to close out here in a minute, but we're going to read Revelation 1:1 again. It says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place, he made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. It says, show his servants what must soon take place. This was not a book written to the world at large. Today's Christianity reads this book, and they all try to apply things. The bear is Russia, and the eagle is the United States. All these different things. Imagine 500 years from now, if the United States is not a power anymore, or someone else is. How are you going to fit that into that? People try to take all these things that are in there that were written for a certain group of people to show them what was going to happen. And I think it was, even though we might not think of it this way when we read Revelation, because it's largely metaphorical, it's encouragement. It's to show them terrible things are coming. You're going through terrible things, but look what's at the other side. Stay the course. Stick with it. It was written to those people. Now, of course, I don't know, maybe someone, a Pharisee happened to read it or hear it or something. I think they would just dismiss it. They wouldn't even think twice about it, most likely. the folks in the 7 churches and others who were on board and were falling away or had fallen away. John's trying to get them back into it. But I believe primarily this book is to those people who were living it. You think about if we apply it to our world, you think if you tried to apply it to their world, German barbarians and the Celts and the Picts in Scotland and wherever else, none of them heard Revelation or read Revelation. Think of it. There was people in China. China was an empire at this time. India, Russia, even in the Americas, there were people living. None of them heard anything out of the book of Revelation, and none of it affected any of them physically at that time. What grew out of it would grow to in people's minds as they, like us, as we learn about it and hear about it, it would grow to affect us. Hopefully it does. But it was to one single people. And I think it was to those who obeyed mostly. I don't know how wide the circulation of the letter is before things happen. But I think overall it was a letter of hope to those people, that their servitude and slavery and giving of all they were, all that was going to be fulfilled for them and in them by God through Jesus. And so that's where I'm going to stop tonight.